Between US and Chinese negotiators have ended for the day with no sign of a deal. President Trump has imposed new taxes on goods from China, saying there was no rush to reach an agreement. 2 detectives from Essex Police have been jailed for closing down child abuse investigations because they were too lazy to do the work. One of Facebook's founders has warned that the man who runs the firm, his former college roommate Mark Zuckerberg, wields unprecedented power which should be curbed. The UK economy grew by 0.5% in the first 3 months of the year. The bigger-than-expected rise is being put down to stockpiling ahead of a possible no-deal Brexit in March. Amid much fanfare, Uber shares have floated on the New York Stock Exchange and promptly dropped in value. President Trump has adopted a defiant stance in his escalating trade war with China. He insisted the decision to more than double tariffs on thousands of Chinese imports would make the United States much stronger, and he threatened to impose them on a further $325 billion worth of goods. In a series of comments on Twitter before his officials resumed talks with China, he said he was in absolutely no rush to finalise a trade agreement. Beijing said it deeply regretted the rise in tariffs and vowed to retaliate. Our North America editor John Sopel is following developments.
A bell can signify celebration, but it also can be used to ring out a warning. And today on Wall Street at the opening of trading, it felt like the latter, after Donald Trump imposed much higher tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the US and warned the world's second biggest economy that he was digging in for the long haul. There's absolutely no need to rush to a deal, the president tweeted, a point amplified by the vice president, Mike Pence.
The China delegation is here again. The vice premier is here. President Trump said yesterday that he received another good letter from President Xi. He has a strong relationship. We believe a deal is possible, but what President Trump has made clear is we think we're in a very strong position either way.
The US is in a strong position in that it imports from China far more than it exports. But there are no easy wins in trade wars. American consumers will find goods in the shops costing far more, and that could suppress demand. For example, bicycles. An importer pays 11% shipping tax, and on top of that will now pay a 25% supplement in tariffs. Either that cost is passed on to the consumer, or the retailer will go out of business. And US producers who export to China, particularly farmers, have already been hard hit by retaliatory measures taken by Beijing. The Chinese Vice Premier, Klo He, who's in Washington for talks to resolve this, warned everyone would be hurt by a trade war.
I came here with sincerity in these special circumstances to engage in rational and candid exchanges with the US side. Of course, China believes raising tariffs in the current situation is not a solution to the problem. It will be harmful to China, the United States and to the whole world.
A few days ago, the expectation was that the two sides would conclude an agreement and sign a deal. But Donald Trump last weekend accused the Chinese of reneging on an agreement to open up their economy to US goods. The president's been accused in the past of being too trigger-happy to impose tariffs. But on this, significantly, the Democratic Party is standing behind him, urging him to remain tough. There's a widespread view here that the Chinese have been allowed to get away with too much for far too long.
Beijing has said it will take what it calls necessary countermeasures in response to the increase in tariffs. Our correspondent there, John Sudworth, looks at how China might respond to President Trump's latest actions.
Donald Trump may have turned a 40-year policy of trade and engagement with China into one of open hostility. But the ruling Communist Party still has plenty of cards to play. While it's deeply fearful of economic damage, it knows that the US tariff list contains many products, from furniture to internet modems to vacuum cleaners, that fill the homes of ordinary Trump-voting Americans. The 25% tax is likely to hurt those US buyers as much as it does the Chinese suppliers. And policymakers in Beijing don't have to worry about electoral cycles. Mr. Trump does. If the US claim is true that China has begun to back away from earlier promises to change its domestic laws to meet US demands on ending protectionism, it may be a sign that it's preparing for a protracted fight. There is, though, still a small window of opportunity for a deal to be worked out. As the tariffs don't apply to goods already in transit, they won't kick in for another 2 weeks or so.
2 detectives from Essex Police have been jailed after they shut down child abuse investigations because they couldn't be bothered to do the work. Sharon Patterson, who's 49, and 47-year-old Lee Pollard were convicted of misconduct in a public office. The court heard that Patterson had skipped work to have a manicure and go for a 4-hour lunch with Pollard, who was her lover, while he destroyed potential evidence. Our correspondent Danny Shaw was at the Old Bailey for the sentencing.
Sharon Patterson and Lee Pollard committed the offences while working on an abuse investigation team which was said to be in crisis, with a rising workload and dwindling staff numbers. Judge Nigel Lickley QC said the pair had cut corners on cases, bringing them to a close for their own selfish benefit. He told them, "You failed the victims." Patterson falsely claimed a decision had been made to drop a sexual abuse investigation which had started after a woman spent years summoning the courage to come forward. During another inquiry, Pollard destroyed 4 photographs found in the house of a suspect accused of molesting a schoolboy. Busola Johnson from the Crown Prosecution Service said what the detectives had done amounted to serious misconduct.
These 2 officers worked in the child sex abuse team, and they were charged with investigating and prosecuting cases brought by some of the most vulnerable members of our society. What they did was deliberate and dishonest, and it went beyond buckling under a heavy workload or mere laziness.
The judge sentenced Patterson to 18 months imprisonment and Pollard to 2 years. Both had already been sacked, and there's a risk they may lose some or all of their police pensions. Another officer was also dismissed during the misconduct inquiry, which lasted 4 years and involved examining decisions made in dozens of cases.
One of Facebook's 4 founders, Chris Hughes, has urged American regulators to break up the social media company, warning that the power wielded by his former college roommate, Mark Zuckerberg, who runs the firm, is now unprecedented and un-American. Mr. Hughes, who left the company in 2007, said the firm had become a monopoly, which had raised competition and allowed abuses to flourish. In response, Facebook said being broken up would not solve the issues. Dave Lee reports from San Francisco.
Chris Hughes joins the growing chorus of those wanting Facebook's immense power to be diluted. He suggests the simplest way to break Facebook up would be to spin out Instagram and WhatsApp, 2 apps that were their own companies until Facebook acquired them, into independent firms once again. Mr. Hughes told CBS News that US regulators should not have allowed such acquisitions to happen in the first place.
We have a long tradition in America of holding power accountable. I mean, after all, our Constitution is built on checks and balances. And sometimes folks in the private sector who are CEOs of companies just get too big. So just like we've done with Standard Oil, AT&T, we say this is a monopoly, a market is frozen, there is no competition, and there's no accountability, and the government needs to step in and break it up.
Mr. Hughes described Mark Zuckerberg's influence as staggering, and beyond that, of anyone else in the public sector or the government. He said he was angry at his friend's focus on growing the company, saying it had led to security and civility being sacrificed for clicks. Nick Clegg, Facebook's head of global communications, said in a statement that only the painstaking introduction of new rules for the internet would bring true accountability, rather than breaking up what he called a successful American company.
The Office for National Statistics says the economy grew by a faster than expected 0.5% in the first 3 months of the year, as companies scrambled to prepare for a hard Brexit. The UK had been due to leave the EU at the end of March. The ONS says the manufacturing sector was particularly buoyant, as our economics correspondent Darshini David explains.
The fastest growth in manufacturing activity for 3 decades should be a cause for celebration. But much of the spike in production in the first 3 months of the year was due to Brexit contingency plans. Businesses stockpiled components and finished goods, such as cosmetics, food and machinery, to avoid the risk of shortages in the event of restrictions caused by leaving the EU. That, combined with solid consumer spending due to higher wage growth, helped the economy grow twice as fast as economists had thought possible just a few months ago. But stockpiling activity has slowed since March, meaning the boost to growth may have been short-lived. Meanwhile, continued uncertainty over Brexit is holding back business investment. The Chancellor Philip Hammond explained that such investment was key to our future prosperity.
Business investment is much lower than we would like it to be. Investment in infrastructure, investment in skills, we have to do that if we want to ensure the prosperity of future generations.
It may be a while until businesses feel confident enough to unlock that cash and look beyond the flurry in our factories due to stockpiling, and our growth remains a touch underpowered, with many risks remaining.
Shares in the minicab hailing app Uber have opened down, with investors seemingly unimpressed by the most hotly anticipated stock market flotation of recent years. Uber had priced its shares at $45 each, which was considered conservative, wary of the sharp fall seen by its rival Lyft after its stock market launch earlier this year. It still valued Uber overall at $80 billion, £60 billion, even though it has never made a profit. From New York, our business correspondent Michelle Fleury reports.
Uber's stock market flotation is the largest the New York Stock Exchange has seen for 5 years. That and the great potential some see in Uber's business has meant it's a busy day for traders like Joseph Denty from Wellington Shields.
Why all the excitement around this?